Hello and welcome back to Confessions, our continuing series on the Book of Confessions. We are on the Westminster Confession of Faith. Yesterday we talked about creation, and we've been talking about God and who He is in His inward being, in the Trinity, all of that sort of stuff. God chooses to create, not because He needs anything outside of Himself, but because He chooses to manifest His glory through something else, through creation. So today we are on chapter 5 of Providence, which is God's continuing act of creation, continuing to sustain His creation. Just a quick note, the book that I referenced yesterday was Quantum Glory. There you go. I'll put the information in the comments. That's what it's called. But anyways, just for those who might have been interested. Both of you. All right. So, let's start with a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the chance to gather together to read these words that were argued and thought and prayed over for years. Thank you that these words are passed down to us that we may glean from them and understand from them. We thank you for your providence as you continue to work in and through us. We pray these things in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Chapter 5 of Providence. Number 1. God, the great creator of all things, doth uphold, direct, dispose, and govern all creatures, actions, and things, from the greatest event to the least, by his most wise and holy providence, according to his infallible foreknowledge, and the free and immutable counsel of his own will, to praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, justice, goodness, and mercy. So, just going to start off that God continues, He upholds, directs, disposes, and governs all creatures, actions, and things, from the greatest event to the least, by his most wise and holy providence, according to his infallible foreknowledge. Now, we talked about this before. The undergirding of all of this is that God knows what is going to happen before it happens, right? Because God is timeless. Now, this is not causality. I say again, it's not, God does not cause us to do certain things, but God knows that we are going to do certain things. So God upholds all of that, and God continues his creation. Yes, God is at work. God does participate in what happens, but he doesn't cause things to happen. There's a difference there. Number 2. Although in relation to the foreknowledge and decree of God, the first cause, all things come to pass immutably and infallibly. Yet by the same providence he ordereth them to fall out according to the nature of second causes, either necessity, freely, or contingently. So God is the first cause. God creates all things and lets everything go. But part of his creation is to allow secondary causes, which are us. God allows for things to happen in sort of a natural order, right? He sets up the physical universe and says, okay, go. Planets spin the way that they're supposed to. He doesn't have to okay, now you need to spin a little bit more and do this. God kind of sets things up. Same thing. God sets it up where when we do something, if we crash our car into somebody, right, there are consequences. There are things that happen because of the physical universe. God sets it up that way so that our actions do something, right? That's kind of part of the the system that he has created. Number 3, God in his ordinary providence maketh use of means, yet is free to work without, above, and against them at his pleasure. Okay. So, God in his ordinary providence makes use of means, of ways of working, yet is free to work without, above, and against them at his pleasure. I think what this is that God can use sort of natural occurrences, right? There are some who say, the Star of Bethlehem was maybe a supernova, or a comet, or some sort of semi-natural occurrence, but the kind of the setting up of exactly the right time and being in the right place, God kind of aligned all of that. But he was using a normal means, like just a natural means. But God can also use other things, right? God can be miraculous, not setting up coincidences, but just, okay, yep, Mary, you're going to have a child. Where does that Y chromosome come from? Well, I'm going to supply it. Boom, there it is, right? So God uses both of those things. God uses natural occurrences that are in fact miraculous, right? Could be looked at as coincidental, but as my mom says, there's no such thing as coincidence, right? Everything lines up. And when there's sort of a coincidence or what's the other word? When things line up, synchronize and that sort of thing, there's something behind that. There's a work of providence. Or God can use just flat, miraculous, I'm going to break my own laws of physics. Boom, there you go. There you go. Number 4, the almighty power, unsearchable wisdom, and infinite goodness of God so far manifest themselves in his providence, that it exceedeth itself even to the first fall. And all other sins of angels and men, and that not by a bare permission, but such as hath joined with it, is a most wise and powerful bounding, and otherwise ordering and governing of them, in a manifold dispensation, to his own holy ends. Yet so, as the sinfulness thereof proceedeth only from the creature, and not from God, who being most holy and righteous, neither is nor can be the author or approver of sin. So, this is kind of a continuation of what we just said, that God allows secondary causes. God allows the first sin to affect all of humanity, right? God allows that our sinful, in that one act, that all of our acts, all of our natures are bent, are sinful. But that doesn't mean that God causes that to happen. God knew it was going to happen. God set up the parameters in which it could happen. Remember, part of the creation was that possibility of sin and the actuality of free will. But God didn't cause sin to happen in the world. Again, we go back to foreknowledge versus causality. They're not the same thing. Just because God sets it up doesn't mean that he creates it. He allows it. So, and he allows that first fall changes all of us. He has joined with it a most wise and powerful bonding. So, number 5, the most wise, righteous, and gracious God doth oftentimes leave for a season his own children to manifold temptations and the corruption of their own hearts, to chastise them for their former sins, or to discover unto them the hidden strength of corruption and deceitfulness of their hearts, that they be humbled, and to raise them to a more close and constant dependence for their support upon himself, and to make them more watchful against all future occasions of sin, and for sundry other just and holy ends. So God, in his providence, in his most wise, righteous, and graciousness, sometimes kind of takes his hands off and lets us do what we're going to do. Now, he doesn't leave us like, I'm going to completely leave you. It's more of a, I'm taking my hands off of you. Think of a child who is learning to walk. Well, if the parent is there with them, holding them up the entire time so they don't fall, they're never going to learn to actually walk. Or they're going to learn to walk and they're just, they're going to have a parent with them constantly. But we as parents realize that there is a time where you say, okay, I'm going to take my hands off of you. I'm going to take my hands off of the bike. I'm going to allow you to make those mistakes that you're going to make so that you learn from them. That's what God does. God allows us to make mistakes. God allows us to just be dumb. God allows us to be tempted. God allows us to be hurt by painful and tragic things, to be hurt by the actions of others, so that we can learn something from it, so we can depend more dearly on him, so that we can, all sorts of numerous ways. And there are sometimes that we see those things and we say, oh, that's what God was doing. Sometimes we don't see those things. Sometimes it will be in the great hereafter when we look back at our life through God's eyes and we go, oh, that's what you were doing there. Because we don't actually realize all of the lessons that we learned in those times. So in the midday prayer just a little bit ago, I referenced Mother Teresa, who we know now after her death because of her journals. Basically, God spoke to her when she was a young woman and said, you need to become a nun. You need to help the people in India, specifically with leprosy, kind of set her on her path. And then pretty much God did not speak to her again. Or at least that was her take on it for many, many, many years, like decades. Right? Why did God do that? Well, because she needed to learn, I guess, how to do it. She'd already been set on the right path, and her her faith was strengthened in that time because, you know what? She kept doing the thing that God had told her to do. Even though she doubted sometimes, even though she really struggled with the fact that God hadn't spoken to her again, she kept doing it. And she brought other people in to that same ministry and just helped thousands of people who were just literally untouchable, who could not be helped by themselves. God in his providence said, you know what? You don't need me to be over your shoulder all the time. You can do it. You're all right. He does that for us as well. So there you go. Number 6. As for those wicked and ungodly men, whom God as a righteous judge for former sins doth blind and harden, from them he not only withholdeth his grace, whereby they might have been enlightened in their understandings and wrought upon in their hearts, but sometimes also withdraweth the gifts which they had, and exposeth them to such objects as their corruption makes occasion of sin, and withal giveth them over to their own lusts, the temptations of the world, and the power of Satan, whereby it cometh to pass that they harden themselves even under those means which God useth for the softening of others. All right, so this one is a little bit of a struggle, right? This is, I think, going a little bit beyond that logical understanding of dual election, right? So dual election is God foreknows, God foreordained all those who are his elect. Therefore, logically, God also knows all of those who are not of the elect, those who are going to be damned, right? This is basically saying the first one is God works in us who are the elect, I presume we're the elect, to bring about faith in our lives. And those times where God, kind of hands off, it allows us to grow in our strength, in our faith, in our maturity, in our humility, all of those sorts of things. Also, says Westminster, God causes others, those who are damned, to kind of be damned, to kind of harden their hearts. I would argue that God doesn't actually harden our hearts, except for in very strange cases, right? So God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. And the reason for that was that God needed to show his power both to Egypt and to the Hebrews, who had kind of forgotten him over 400 years. They were just about to go into the wilderness. And they really didn't learn the lesson very well, even though he shows his power to them. But it says several times that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. I think there are some times that God maybe does that a little bit for his divine providence. But I also don't think, but I think we as humans, we harden our hearts much more. I think God is always at work to bring about redemption for all, gives us as many chances as we possibly can have. Some people, however, they hear that same, that they feel that God has allowed them to walk by themselves, and they choose to use that as a reason to doubt. Well, God has just left me. God is alone and apart from me in this time of torment. So screw God. I don't want to have anything to do with him. That's absolutely true. Some people take that tack, right? In Acts, there's an interesting word, and I don't remember which word it is in Greek, but it's this word that is cut to the soul, right? So Peter speaks at Pentecost, and he preaches to the people, and they are cut to the deep. They're cut to the soul, and thousands give their life to Christ. Well, later on, I believe it's Peter or somebody else is speaking, and that, or maybe it's Thomas, or not, Stephen. That same word is used, that they are cut to the soul, but their reaction is, well, we're going to kill you. It's a very different reaction, but it's the same thing, right? Same thing here. God uses things to teach us humility, to teach us to trust in him, to teach us all sorts of different things. And sometimes, yes, sometimes we as humans don't go that way. We say, you know what, I'm not going to trust in you, I'm going to trust in myself harder. I'm going to be mad at you because you did this to me, right? And we know people like this, right? It's a very similar, right? I think it was in the Confessions thing where I referenced role-playing games. There's a guy in the campaign that I'm in right now, and for a while he would see where the GM wanted him to go and say, nope, not going to do that. I'm going to do something totally different. So we spent a lot of sessions just kind of twiddling our thumbs, literally. Same sort of thing, right? What we are to do as God's people is we see where God is kind of laying things out, and we see where God's providence is going, and we say, okay, I'm going to go with that. But sometimes others look at those things and say, I don't want to do that, I'm going to do something else. So we harden our own hearts. It's really interesting that while Westminster is very clear that God does not cause sinfulness at the beginning, he is the cause of, in certain cases, for the wicked and the ungodly men to be bound and hardened, which I don't know how that lines up, but that's what Westminster says. That's okay. We don't have to agree with everything, and maybe we need to kind of think it over and understand more, maybe I need to reread and see where I stand on there. But that's kind of my initial gut reaction. Anyways, number 7. As the providence of God doth in general reach to all creatures, so after a most special manner it taketh care of his church, and disposeth all things to the good thereof. So, just as the providence works in our lives individually, God also, works on a sort of the meta scale, right? That God works through his church. And that's not even, yes, that's individual churches, but that's his church globally and throughout time. God is at work providentially with his church to bring about his ends as well. So God is at work in us and through us, through his providence, not only individually, but also corporately as well. And through nations, I would add as well. So that's the end of chapter 5. So chapter 6 is of the fall of man, of sin, and of the punishment thereof. So we'll do that tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me today for Confessions. We'll continue on with the Westminster's Confession of Faith, and join me for that. Go to our website, faithpresbyteriansc.com, for more information. Also, click the link in the comments below, and that actually brings you to the text of the Westminster Confession of Faith. And so you can read through what it actually says. I didn't put all of the footnotes because that was going to be a big pain. But if you want to look at all of those footnotes, there are some great places that you can find those as well. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, share it with others. If you have any questions, please let me know. There's a comments bar down below this video, and you can put your comments in and ask, and I'll try to answer them either on screen or by typing it in. But thank you so much for joining me today, and have a very blessed day.